Hi, everyone, and thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. Welcome to the Hidden Advantages of Natural Lyme Treatment. If I can sum up in one word the goal of this talk, it's empowerment. So it's empowerment to you to use natural, non-toxic methods of healing in conjunction with antibiotics so that you can heal faster, heal more efficiently, and heal fully. So ultimately there is an end point for people where you come back to a place of feeling vital in your body and you can focus on the things that you love and want to do in life. So, but what are the challenges and obstacles in doing this? We are brought up believing that if you get an infection, it is treatable with antibiotics, end of story, basically. And some doctors still believe that this is the truth for Lyme disease. But as I think most of you know, that with Lyme, it is actually sometimes much more complicated, and antibiotics alone are insufficient in some cases. When they don't work, that's when things start to get confusing. Do you do more antibiotics? There are so many options that you can read about on the internet or that well-meaning friends may recommend. An energy machine or, there's just so many things on Lyme forums that are suggested. And so people become overwhelmed, they get stuck, paralyzed, they might just dabble in things but not really understand how to use alternative methods of healing. And indeed, the longer that you have been sick, the greater the need to do more than just antibiotics to heal. At least that's been my clinical experience. So, what are your options? Well, I've specialized in the holistic treatment of Lyme for the last over 10 years, and I've learned that the best approach involves three not so obvious things. The first is that it really must involve the rebuilding of a healthy body. And if you think about your body like a house, think about the foundation. And if you're building a house to live in, are you going to allow that foundation to be to have holes in it and to be unsteady? It is probably not going to be a very smart place to live. And so it's just the very same with our own bodies, that we need to get the basic building blocks of health in place. So that's in part what I'll be sharing. The second essential ingredient is getting rid of what's blocking your healing. So if you're not one of those people who took 3 weeks of doxycycline and got over your Lyme disease, then something is getting in the way. And you want to figure out what that is. And so removing that roadblock, discovering what it is and addressing it is the second essential ingredient. The third is strategy, or what I would say is right strategy. It's because among all of the options and choices that we have 400 herbs in our pharmacy. And so how do you know what is best for you at this time? That really comes from an understanding of what's going on in your body individually and what is making you sick. So from there, you can logically apply the strategies that I will share with you today in order to address those underlying problems. So just to give you an example, if someone comes to me and they've already been on antibiotics for 3 or 5 years, and they're still having a lot of pain and inflammation, I'm probably going to recommend that they take a break from that for a while, because the evidence is that the antimicrobial strategy is not working currently, and instead I would likely recommend that they build up their system in other ways, that we work to rebuild their immune system and their energy and to calm inflammation and just take a break from what's provoking the inflammation. So ideally, when you understand that there are other options beyond antibiotics that may be required for you to use in order to heal fully, and you understand what some of those different strategies are, then you can, make some choices and begin to incorporate things like dietary changes and herbals and other forms of treatment sooner. And you have a better sense. You're able to tune in a little bit and say, you know what, I think antibiotics, maybe I've had enough of them for now, and you know that there are other viable alternatives. So I like to start with this picture. This is a picture of my family, my husband and my 2 girls, although it's an old picture. But I think when you get right down to it, we all really want the same thing, which is just to enjoy the simple things in life. And the truth is that chronic illness can really get in the way of that. And when the medical system is inadequate, and we realize we need more help than what we're getting, that's a scary moment. And that scary moment hit us when my husband got ill from Lyme disease approximately 12 years ago. He sought medical solution. He just wanted a clear diagnosis, and he wanted to just take a pill and get fixed, basically. I'd say he wanted an easy solution, and that's very natural. And that went on for at least a year, where he had episodes of fever and malaise and night sweats and just really dysfunction. During this time period, I did get pregnant, and when I was a few weeks from having our first child, and he kind of woke up another morning with just an inability to get out of bed, it hit me like a ton of bricks that there was nothing out there. This Dr. Goose Chase thing was not going to get him better. And he did not respond well to his first initial round of doxy. It actually made him more sick, so we didn't feel that that was a smart route for him to pursue. And I realized that it was up to us to sort of start to take care of this from the inside out. And long story short, we began to make some radical dietary changes. I was already seeing some Lyme patients and practicing, but I really dug in to understand better and really experiment and try things, and I've learned so much in the past decade. And yes, fortunately, my husband is very well now, so that is possible. And so, what I've learned is that, number one, we really can't take our health for granted. Very healthy people get very ill with Lyme. But as well, we have to take the approach or the mindset that life is our friend and our teacher ultimately. And that for many patients, Lyme or some similar chronic, mysterious inflammatory illness, it can be a gateway to learning how to take care of yourself differently, to living somewhat differently, to learning about different ways of healing that you just never had the reason, you never had the need to explore before. And when I have patients who are really willing to participate in their healing and to try things that maybe they don't know anybody else who's trying this diet, and it doesn't fit with their family and prior lifestyle, but they're willing to change in order to heal themselves because they're very clear that that's what they want more than anything, then they heal. We find the way for that to happen. So I know that others have spoken to this today, but I think it's just important to briefly dive into the reality of the problem, which is that this Lyme is an epidemic, essentially. More and more people are acquiring Lyme borreliosis and the co-infections every year, and the risk of exposure is not going away anytime soon, and I so respect the work of the environmentalists who have spoken here today, because that is a really important level on which to work on this problem. But I would say, in addition to the fact that we're facing an epidemic, we're also facing a grave problem of increasing toxicity in our bodies. And we know that babies born currently have a couple hundred chemicals in their bodies already. So we've really created a situation in which we're very vulnerable to a tick bite that is harboring infections. And this is a problem we just have to begin to be willing to face. We can actually change the terrain of our bodies much faster than we can change, the ecological terrain. So that is good news. And that's really a lot of the basis of the work that I do with patients. So we also have had people speak to the fact that Lyme disease diagnosis is a big problem. And we know that the longer that it takes to get diagnosed, the more entrenched the infections become, and then the more difficult and longer it takes to heal. And just an example of some of the diagnostic, criteria we often think of is the bullseye rashes. So there's a couple of nice ones, but then there's some very different examples of Lyme rashes that many doctors would not recognize as Lyme, and there is a myriad of misdiagnoses. Based on the skin, it could be cellulitis or ringworm or a spider bite, and many, many other misdiagnoses are common, which is so unfortunate because then it's more difficult for the antibiotics to work as we wish they would. Furthermore, we know that these infections, borreliosis, Babesia, Bartonella, they're known as stealth pathogens for a reason. They have essentially many strategies for immune system evasion and manipulation, which I won't go into a lot of detail here today because I want to get to the treatment part. But it's just important to recognize, because this is why we have the diagnostic and the treatment challenges that we do, is that they really have the intelligence to block antibody attachment. They manipulate the immune system. They're great provokers of inflammation, and then affect the body in a way that the immune system can't turn that inflammation off. They also tend to go to places in the body that are not readily accessible by the immune system or by many antibiotics, including places like the joints and the central nervous system. There are 3 routes of tissue damage. This is useful to know because it also helps us to understand how the infections operate in the body and therefore what is needed in order to treat ourselves and heal. Number 1 is the direct cell damage and death. So it's infecting a certain cell intracellularly and ultimately causing cell death or damage and dysfunction. The second is through the immune response, which I just alluded to, which is the turning on of the inflammatory pathways, and this can affect the entire system of the body, not just the local tissues where they are living. And there is a lot of collateral damage that occurs as a result of the inflammation. And then the third is the parasitism. So these infections, Lyme borreliosis specifically has a huge genome, and not one gene is for creating its own nutrition. So it completely lives off the host resource. And that's your collagen, your magnesium, minerals, and other resources within your body. And in terms of treatment, there is plenty of evidence that the 3-week protocol of doxycycline is sometimes not enough for everyone. And I won't even talk about the 1-day dose of doxycycline. A lot depends. The success of the initial antibiotic treatment, a lot depends on how soon after initial infection the antibiotics are taken. And so the sooner the better. If you've got a known infection, you've got a window of opportunity there for the antibiotics to do their best work. However, in my husband's case, he got a flaring fever and bullseye rash and absolute clear Lyme disease. He took his 3 weeks of doxy, but it wasn't enough, likely because of the presence of co-infections that weren't discovered. So there are reasons that doesn't always work, even in the best of circumstances. And so these are some reasons that antibiotics may fail. First of all, we have the presence of persister bacteria, and we know that persister bacteria occurs in dogs, monkeys, and definitely occurs in humans. There is the adaptive mutation, so the ability of these infections to essentially adapt, to mutate, to protect themselves, to change form in order to protect themselves from the antibiotics. And they also will move into biofilm colonies that's shared by other types of bacteria, and it's like a hideout. You know, it's like a colony of bacteria in the body that grows, and it's a hideout for them. And we know that the common antibiotics, such as doxycycline, are most effective against the actively growing spirochetal form of Lyme borreliosis, but they are poor. They're not very effective against the round bodies. They really can't access anything that's in biofilm. There are some pharmaceuticals that are used to treat the round body forms and the biofilm. And so Lyme literate doctors will use other medications like Bactrim and rifampin and so forth. The problem with these sometimes is that they're very expensive. They have more side effects. They're harsher on the body. There's more potential for organ damage. They're more toxic, more side effects. So sometimes people don't tolerate them. Basically, they just can't take it. And that's a lot of who I see in my practice. We also have the problem that the antibiotics just might not be the right ones. If you have co-infections that haven't been clearly diagnosed, they may require a whole other set of antibiotics than the ones that you're taking. So that could be a reason that you're not getting all better. And then some people just can't get them because no doctor will give them. And perhaps they don't have or they can't afford to visit a Lyme literate doctor who would give it to them. So, I want to point out antibiotics, they can and do work to a large degree. In my practice, it's really filled by the people who, for one reason or another, sooner or later, they reach an endpoint, they hit a wall with the antibiotics. So this can happen. And I think in my view, I'd rather see people before they really hit that endpoint. If we began to combine treatments and integrate treatments earlier, I think there would be better outcomes for patients. Other reasons that antibiotics alone may not restore your health have to do with toxins. Lyme is a disease of toxicity. It generates endotoxins from within the body that fuel inflammation and that fuel symptoms. These toxins need to be dealt with through detoxification. Poor gut health leads to poor nutrient absorption, poor immunity. It can lead to brain and mood disorders of its own accord. It is very hard to heal if you have chronically poor gut health. There is hormonal deficiency, which can be a byproduct of the stressors of the infections and require specific treatment. The presence of things like mold, mycotoxins, or heavy metals in the system are potentially a roadblock that will prevent you from progressing. Immune system deficiency, where the immune system really doesn't have the strength to rise up and take hold and take back command of the body. And nutrient deficiencies, again, because of things like leaky gut or the parasitism of the infections. And so antibiotics doesn't change these conditions. Its sole focus is to kill the microbes. And so these are the kinds of issues that can be dealt with directly, and often when we do, it can lead to just the patient feels better, some symptoms resolve, they get stronger, and even it can therefore help antibiotics, if you're still taking them, work better. And at the same time, again, these are the kinds of roadblocks that people hit, and if you don't deal with them, they may prevent you from really healing your body, from your body being able to heal. So this is the sort of the bigger picture. We're kind of zooming out to see the bigger picture, that it's not just narrowing in on the infections and the bugs themselves. More is often needed. And this is where natural medicine comes in. It is really all about creating a foundation for health and healing. And this, this might sound soft or something, but it's actually just so essential. And again, I come back to the analogy of the house. And I will share another piece of my story is that, so my husband got initially very sick. He took his 3 weeks of Doxy and just started to feel better. And about a week later, there were crazy electrical storms moving through our neighborhood, and we went out on some farm tour anyway. But we came home and our house was burning down. And the volunteer firemen were there trying to save the house, save our cats, save belongings. But so we went through this sort of journey of the loss and all the stagnant life energy, the stagnation, just things not getting any better, and gradually figuring out solutions, and ultimately the rebuild of both body and home at the same time. So, again, it's like if you want a strong house, you have to make sure there's not holes in this foundation where varmints are going to find their way in and build a nice nest and coexist with you. So, these building blocks of human health are the kinds of things that we just take for granted. But we can't anymore assume that the water that's coming out of the faucet is clean and non-toxic, because for the most part, it is toxic. It has toxins in it, right? So it's like we know this kind of thing on some level. Sometimes it's just very overwhelming, or we just don't know how to really deal and remedy these situations. So, this is where some guidance and support is very useful. But we want, if you're trying to heal from chronic illness, you want to really examine anything that is going into your body to be sure that it is not toxic and that it is clean. Because otherwise that is, you know, you're taking in what is supposed to be the building blocks of your cells and tissues. And if they are riddled with toxic elements, then that is a burden to your system, and that is going to get in the way of healing. So, you know, really dialing in on things like sleep and movement, doing just the best that you can with these kinds of things. Sunlight is another building block of health. So I'll talk a little bit more specifically as we go through the specific strategies about these things. So essentially, again, we're putting the building blocks of health into place, as well as removing the toxins and obstructions that are in the way. And doing these things is what will change your inner environment, your terrain, from one that is essentially harboring a lot of waste, decay, where tissues are deteriorating and there's just a lot of stagnation, which people feel. You know the feeling of that stagnation. It's what, you know, it's the hangover when you didn't have anything to drink, but that's how you feel when you wake up in the morning, you know, or what, just, you can't get off the couch because your body is so heavy and doesn't want to move, or the stiffness in the joints. So we all know, we have a version of what that feels like. And so we gradually make changes so that instead you have a cleaner body, which has more oxygen-rich blood and more nutrient and nutrient resource for your cells and tissues to operate. And there is blood flow and electrical energy flow. So, you know, this is the ingredients of a body that is then capable of responding to treatments, whether that's antibiotics or herbs or acupuncture or what have you. And it's important to say that it really is, you know, the natural medicine is not a fix-me paradigm. It's very highly participatory, which is actually empowering. It's exciting. It means that you get to be one of the drivers of your path of healing. And the more focused you can be, then probably the faster you're going to move forward. Ultimately, our goal is to increase the capacity of the body to heal. And there is things like improved energy and reduction of symptoms and so forth along the way. And ultimately, resilience against future disease, because a tick bite could come along again in your life. And perhaps that's very likely that will happen. But when the system is clean and you know what to do, you know what to take, you have some good non-toxic options in your medicine cabinet, you're operating at a whole other level of self-protection. So, hidden advantages of natural Lyme treatment include increased tolerance and effectiveness of antibiotics, the elimination of toxins, protection of organs that are being affected and potentially damaged by the infections, and perhaps a harsh antibiotic regimen, such as the liver and the spleen, the kidneys. We support energy and well-being, but hopefully symptom reduction as soon as possible, and facilitation of the rebuilding and regeneration of tissues like muscle, nerves, brain, energy, and immune system. So specific strategies, this happens through specific strategies that are layered into your treatment plan, in addition to the antimicrobials. These include detoxification, gut restoration, immune system and energy enhancement, nervous system restoration, hormone balancing, non-toxic antimicrobials and biofilm disruptors, addressing these roadblocks to recovery, and also creating sustainable health generation systems in your daily life. Because most people with chronic Lyme are facing, it's going to take some time to heal. And so we have to make it doable and even pleasurable, hopefully. So I'll speak about these strategies a little more specifically. Detoxification. Again, Lyme is a disease of toxicity. If I had to pick one strategy out that I would just recommend for absolutely everyone who's dealing with a complex chronic illness, this would be it. I have seen so much positive patient response when people start to learn how to do this. And I really emphasize it's not so much about supplements when you're trying to detoxify, it's really about certain lifestyle practices. Just well, back up a moment and say, chronic Lyme patients are often poor detoxifiers. They have a very high toxin load. Part of that is the Herxheimer responses to antimicrobial treatment. And so the lack of detoxification is just a major obstacle to recovery. So some things that we focus on are hydration, which is not just about quantity, it's about quantity and quality. And I really recommend finding a way to get clean, pure spring water. There is a website called findaspring.com. Living up here, you may have springs near you where you can actually just go fill jars of clean spring water for free, and it is the best, most hydrating water available. Otherwise, you can buy spring water, but don't just believe what's on the label. The water industry is not regulated, so you really have to vet the company that you buy your water from, if that's how you get your water. Alkalinity, this means raising the pH of your system. The general idea is that the infections do well in an acidic body where there is a lot of waste that's stuck in your colon or in other places in the cells. And that waste is acidic, it's metabolic waste, it's emotional, chemistry, it is pollution and so forth. All of that is acidic, it gets stored in the body, and it requires alkalinity to magnetize and to pull out. And that alkalinity really comes from vegetables primarily and other sources as well. But we really recommend a high vegetable diet, essentially. Fruits are great too, for the most part. And juicing is a great way to just get a lot more of that alkalinity and nutrient into your system than you ever could trying to eat that many vegetables. So it's primo food as medicine. Another really important aspect of detoxification is elimination. So this is why you can't just take glutathione and milk thistle and expect to feel better, although I do like and I do use those supplements. But what's really essential is elimination, actually getting waste out of the body. There's 4 ways that happens: pooping and peeing, sweating, and breathing. And so doing what is necessary in order to accentuate these pathways of elimination is very important for detoxification. We do use herbals. Herbs are a great way to support the liver, and things like glutathione and B vitamins that are specifically necessary for the liver detox pathways to function well. Gut restoration. So we know that the gut is a major source of inflammation and allergic response. It is a place in the body where pathogenic bacteria, disease-causing bacteria, and other problems like parasites, yeast, and biofilm, they congregate and they thrive in a gut that is just not moving well, not eliminating well, or that's been fed processed foods and so forth. That's being, if you're consuming sugar, you keep these kinds of pathogens happy. And so it's really important to deal with your gut. Some people don't have a lot of gut problems, other people have enormous gut problems. So this is something that the focus varies depending on your particular situation, but if you do have gut problems, it is really necessary to address them. And this involves diet. We really individualize diets with people, but in general, I recommend looking into paleo and autoimmune paleo diets because for the most part, most people with chronic inflammation do best on this kind of diet. It's a challenge if you are a vegan or vegetarian, and so that requires some modifications. But it removes the food allergens, and it can really bring down levels of inflammation. And then from there, it's really about the functional restoration of the GI tract, from the stomach, what's going on in the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and there are a variety of supplements and herbs that are useful to address places where dysfunction's happening. The third part is immunity and energy enhancement. And this is in some ways at the core of what we do, because it's just the understanding that in order for the system to, healing happens when the body has enough of its energy that it is able to use to begin to push out the infections and regenerate and heal the tissues and the areas that have been damaged by the infections and the inflammation. So, it's ultimately about restoring vitality. And restoring vitality is incredibly supported by detoxification and gut restoration. Exercise and movement. If you're a stagnant person, you are never going to experience your full vitality. So start where you can and look for ways to receive the support that you need, but know that this is something that you want to address. Also, the sun. Our bodies, our cells require light in order to thrive. We are, humanity evolved under the sun. And we live at a time where we're indoors most of the time. Lyme is rampant in northern climates where we don't get a lot of sun exposure, and part of a good chunk of the year the sun is not very strong. So getting sufficient UVB light exposure without sunblock is very important and can greatly, this is how the body produces vitamin D for real, and that can really supercharge the immune system and the mood and the energy. And we also use there's other spectrums of light, near and far infrared light. The far infrared is part of sauna treatment. That can also be very helpful, as well as adaptogenic herbs that are warming. That it's like the idea of the herbs help to stoke the inner fire. Many people with chronic Lyme, and particularly Bartonella, suffer from cold and very poor circulation. And it's like, the blood is just not moving. You feel like a reptile. And so these warming herbs are used to support circulation and to support the immune system. And just a couple vitamin examples of what also can be helpful is vitamin D and C. Nervous system restoration. So many people with chronic Lyme have very stressed nervous systems and have a lot of they're very inflamed, and there's a lot of neurotoxicity happening in their body. And so in this aspect of treatment, it really becomes important to begin to deal with oneself and to learn how to manage things like anxiety and depression and stress responses. We also, use certain things like CBD, medical marijuana, to help treat symptomatically, but they are also calm the inflammation in the nervous system. There are also herbs, sleep aids, getting the circadian rhythm and solid sleep happening is another piece of health that is just a crux. Like when people aren't sleeping well, it is very hard to have good energy and to have a stronger immune system. So this is essential. Things like magnesium, neurotransmitter support, and for free, deep breathing. Okay, there are tools that our body has an innate system for calming down and calming inflammation in the nervous system, and it is simply through using breathing, which you can learn how to breathe deeply, and and how to relax deeply. And again, this is empowering, because the medicine is actually, it resides within your own system. It's just a matter of learning how to access it. Hormone balancing, this is just a piece of the puzzle. Many people they develop thyroid imbalance, adrenal insufficiency, sex hormone depletion as a result of physical and emotional stress of the illness, and also problems that arise from the infections affecting the glands themselves. So there are, testing. I recommend having some testing done, particularly the Dutch test. If you have someone who, a conventional doctor won't do a Dutch test, but if you're working with somebody who's integrative, they will, and then you just can take a look at these levels, and to get a full thyroid panel through any lab, and begin to see if these are some of the missing pieces for yourself, and they can definitely be remedied. Non-toxic antimicrobials and biofilm disruptors. So this particularly comes into play with my patients who are off conventional antibiotics for one reason or another, but we still feel that there is a microbial load that needs to be addressed. So herbs and essential oils in particular are fantastic broad spectrum agents against borreliosis, all co-infections, as well as yeast. There's antiviral herbs. This is an area where pharmaceuticals don't have so many options, but there are a lot of herbal options, as well as mold illness, fungal infections. So in part, success here is about targeting accurately what is the infectious layer that is most active in your system, and this comes from reading the signs and symptoms. In other words, your signs and symptoms they're a response. They're sort of showing you how the immune system is focused. And so based on that is how we can begin to differentiate what infection is active in your system, even if you have labs that say, well, I have Lyme borreliosis, Babesia, I have mycoplasma, and cytomegalovirus, and yeast infection. But which of those is most, what is your immune system paying attention to? And that is what we want to support, rather than trying to divert it and treating something just because you have a lab, but that's not what the immune system is focused on, because your immune system is part of your body's inherent intelligence. It knows what to do, and we want to support it in doing that. There is also great biofilm disruptors, enzymes, earthworm, and certain herbs that are used to break up the biofilm. So we don't rush headlong into breaking up biofilm, but if you've been on antimicrobials for a while and it's time to take it to the next level, then biofilm disruptive agents would become part of the treatment plan. We use we make liposomal essential oil remedies. I see essential oils as they're probably the most potent form of using plant medicine, and there is some really exciting research being done with essential oils now on specifically persister bacteria. This is an example of one of the recent, some of the recent research that was done by Ying Zhang from Johns Hopkins Department of Molecular Biology and Immunology. And in his paper, he states, we found that not all essential oils, he tested, I think, about 24 essential oils. So not all had activity against Borrelia burgdorferi stationary phase culture. He lists the top 5 essential oils as oregano, cinnamon bark, rosebud, citronella, and wintergreen. At a low concentration of 0.25%, showing high anti-persister activity that is more active than the known persister drug daptomycin. So he's saying that these essential oils at this level seem more effective than the best persister drug. Now this is in a petri dish, okay? So this is really, you have to understand it's preliminary, but it speaks to the strength of something like these essential oils taken internally as an alternative to drugs that not everybody can tolerate or access. And they also were found to have excellent anti-biofilm ability and to dissolve the aggregated biofilm-like structures. So that's exciting. This is another just example of research that has been done. This comes from Eva Sappi of the University of New Haven, the Lyme disease research group there. She tested cemento and banderol, which are 2 herbal extracts that come from the Cowden protocol, comparing it with the doxycycline. And she says our results demonstrated that both herbal agents, but not doxycycline, had very significant effects on all forms of Borrelia burgdorferi, especially when used together, suggesting that herbal agents could provide an effective therapeutic approach for Lyme disease patients. So I offer this really just to help you understand that the herbal realm is very important in terms of what we need to consider from the spectrum of antimicrobials and their effectiveness. Part 7 here is to uncover and address your robust recovery. So I've mentioned this before, but it's things like heavy metal toxicity, mold illness, parasites, dental cavitations, unaddressed or co-infections, or other medical conditions. And also things like structural misalignments and emotional traumas. These are things that hold the infections in place. It's like a rigidity inside the system that enables the infections to stay there no matter how much antibiotic you take. So the thing is this, is if you are taking antimicrobials and you're not getting better, if you are bumping up against these walls where you just feel like, I've been doing this protocol for months or maybe years, and I got somewhat better, but now I'm not. Then you want to really be looking at these other situations that are common. They're common. And I see them in patients all the time. And I actually, now I look for them. I look for evidence of these things right away in somebody who's chronically ill. I don't waste my time anymore because it's just so common that they're happening. And the sooner that you start to unravel them, the better. And finally, this is about creating sustainable health-generating systems in your life. And the reason it has to be sustainable because we're talking about long-term treatment. Okay, you're not just gonna do a cleanse for a weekend, you know, and get all better. You know, it just doesn't work that way. But so what is possible is that you begin to implement in a step-by-step way changes that are detoxifying and that are health promoting, and you will gradually get stronger from that. And you find ways. Everybody has to figure out the puzzle of their own life, you know, and what kind of support you need. And how to cook differently, for example, how to eat differently, how to drink different water, right? All of these things. But ultimately, you know, this big picture is important because for healing to occur, all of these aspects of health and healthy functioning in the body, they need to be addressed and restored to normal over time. And this is also very possible. This is doable. And that is my main message to you. So we have a website, it's uprootinglyme.com, and there's a lot of blogs on this kind of material that you can just go and read. If you know, obviously I can't say everything in an hour, and so I am happy to answer questions, but there's a lot of good information on the website and our blogs. And I do not know what time it is, but okay, well, any questions? And we have a table down the hall also. I'm around for questions later too. Yes?
You had said there was a website to find natural springs in your area.
Findaspring.com. Local people put information in about local springs. It's a lot of fun to find a spring near you. And inevitably somebody's testing the water. I've never had anybody drinking from a spring who reported getting sick from them. Usually there's a lot of local people who are drinking from it. That's where I get all my water, is from a local spring. Yeah?
If somebody is being treated for allergies, some of which like are having mold allergies and stuff, is there anything, do you think that could complicate the Lyme treatment itself?
So you're saying somebody has Lyme and they also have mold allergies that they're being treated for in what way?
Allergy shots.
I mean, there's no reason that person can't also treat the, heal from Lyme. The main thing I think that you want to be cautious of is anything that's going to suppress the immune system. Things like prednisone, I get concerned about. I definitely do not recommend getting any vaccines while trying to treat yourself for Lyme, simply because of the stress on the immune system and the toxins that are in the vaccines, not the vaccines themselves. But I've just seen people have a setback when they got a flu shot, for example.
So I was wondering what you recommend for people who, like you mentioned being active and you mentioned like these herbal options with like essential oils that are like authentic or usually really expensive. Mm-hmm. What do you recommend for people who are so affected by Lyme and chronic Lyme that they can't work anymore? Like how do you, and like are maybe physically unable to go out and do these like exercises that you were talking about?
Sure, that's a great question. So, you know, everybody has to start with where they're at and figure out what you can do. So, for example, if somebody is very limited physically, then I've had people just get one of those trampolines, those individual trampolines, and just sit on it and bounce, which is helpful for the lymph system. Or if you can walk, to walk as slowly but do what you can, but to do it consistently. If you're somebody who really can't do much in terms of movement, then what's important is to just do a little several times a day. Because the idea is that you want to start to build a tolerance, and it's all about conditioning. And you have to start where you're at and really tune in and understand your limits and be patient with those limits, but know that they will change. And so the worst thing you can do is give up and just say, I can't do this. Because you can do what you can do and accept that and work with that. That's your edge, you know, and everybody has their edge place.
Right, and like the other part of my question about like, this usually ends up being like expensive treatment, like expensive things that you're like saunas, like you mentioned, like those aren't cheap. Like, so what do you mention for like, what do you suggest for those people who like aren't working right now to afford things like that?
So I recommend starting with the basics. So just for example, if you can find a spring, that is free. Like, think about what the things that you can do that are basically no or low cost. Perhaps that's harvesting your own spring water. Look at things like food and any way to make inexpensive upgrades to what is going into the mouth. Honestly, less food is more. Even just turning food into liquids, like eating blending your foods and adding water and having more liquid meals to ease on the digestive stress. There are people who will wild harvest and make their own tinctures to save money. And I will just mention, we do a low cost clinic 3 times a year in Kingston, but we also see people from afar through video conferencing. So it's a $50 consultation, but it's ideal for people who are committed, but they can't afford our regular rates. So I just want to offer that since you mentioned that question. So, and there are ways like this. These are just a few examples. I could go on, and I'm happy to talk to you more if you want, okay? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dave.